You're going to win, Prime Minister. You're going to win.
Much you might think has changed since the day our first Prime Minister arrived to spend his first day in his new home. There were, of course, no people like me shouting questions 270 years ago when Sir Robert Walpole took up residence in Downing Street, the new official home of the First Lord of the Treasury, the title that still appears on the brass plaque on the most famous front door in the world. However, Walpole and each of the Prime Ministers I'll examine in this series sought to control Parliament, to control his critics and, of course, the media, just like the latest occupant of number 10. He used a mixture of patronage, of fear and political manipulation to stay in power. And he, like so many Prime Ministers, often had reason to object to the way in which he was portrayed by the commentators of his day.
And the most famous caricature of him is a huge naked bottom straddling the gate to the Treasury with various people kissing his arse. Because to get on in 18th century politics, that's what you had to do.
Ken, now Lord Baker, the former cabinet minister, who collects, chronicles and celebrates political cartoons.
Now it's interesting, no face, but everybody knew it was Walpole, because Walpole ran the show. You know, he was the one who gave out the jobs, the sinecures, the captaincies, the peerages. He got the MPs their seats, and it was known as the Robinocracy, government by Robin, for Robin, by Robin.
Our first Prime Minister governed from 1721 for 21 years. That's as long as Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair combined. Walpole only moved the headquarters of the Robinocracy to Downing Street after he'd already had 14 years in the job. What was his study is now the Cabinet Room. His portrait hangs on the wall, behind where the present Prime Minister sits. Are you very conscious as you sit here in the Cabinet Room, Prime Minister, that there, over your shoulder, is the very first man to occupy this building as Prime Minister?
I think the funny thing, when you're sitting in the chair of Prime Minister, Walpole is behind you and you've got no sense that he's there. If you're sitting on the other side, as I used to do as Chancellor, you look up at him and see this rather foreboding figure. And you look round this Cabinet Room, you've got a sense of what's been happening for not just years, but centuries.
There is much more than shared history that links our first and our latest Prime Minister. Both had to cope with a major international financial crisis. Walpole was dubbed Screen Master General for his efforts to screen ministers and courtiers from the effects of the bursting of the South Sea bubble. And both had to impose their will on a parliament grown used to defying ministers' wishes. In the early 18th century, the Commons had become an ungovernable ragbag of factions. Walpole, unlike Brown, didn't have a party machine, so instead he relied on patronage and money.
That statesman has the strongest hold, whose tool of politics is gold.
John Gay's fables satirised the corruption of the Walpole era, as did his Beggar's Opera.
The modes of the court so common are grown that a true friend can hardly be met. Friendship for interest is but a loan which they let out for what they can get. 'Tis true.
Never mind friendship for interest. There is one phrase that will forever be associated with Walpole. Every man has his price. Like so many famous phrases, there's no proof that he ever actually uttered those words. We do know, however, that this is what he told MPs in March 1734.
I will allow, sir, that with respect to bribery, the price must be higher or lower, generally in proportion to the virtue of the man who is to be bribed.
In other words, bribing voters and buying seats wouldn't cost so much if only the electors were more virtuous. Fixing elections and looking after his allies was how our first Prime Minister brought Parliament under control. His supporters were, according to one MP, disciplined troops regularly paid, taking on a mere militia. Edward Pearce, the political journalist, is a biographer of Walpole.
It had been the case for as long as any remembered that country gentlemen who owned 2 or 3 seats in Parliament traded them. Sometimes they just supported their party, as it were, or their rough grouping. What Walpole did was to systematise the whole thing and to do it on an industrial basis. And he used the sinecures, the officers of state, to recompense people who would send in a couple of klutzes.
Prime Ministers these days have a range of inducements at their disposal. Yes, promises of promotion.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?